support that strategy.
Yeah, I know when we saw Ross a little bit earlier, he played against a mono red deck and he beat it pretty easily. Just, you know, he was able to counter some removal spells with Brave the Elements, same thing with Boros Charm as well, and be able to finish off his opponent with Daring Skyjack, which is a 2-drop that we haven't seen a lot of. As you see, he's going to start off with a Judge's Familiar before passing the turn back. But I kind of like the composition of his deck. He's got 12 1-drops, he's got some 2s, and then his non-creature spells with Brave the Elements and Boros Charm looks like pretty good.
Yeah, he's going to come out fast, consistent. One of the traditional strengths of white is the efficiency of its creatures. And, you know, when you're describing the mono-red matchup, it's like each step of the way, the white creature's frequently going to be a little bit better than the red creature. Might not prove to be quite the same because Christopher with the red-green deck has a lot of giant beasts that could definitely put a stop to Ross.
And we saw Chris come across for one with the Elvish Mystic. Ross considering blocking it with the Judge's Familiar for a moment, decides not to, wants to leave his 1/1 flyer in play. Chris follows up with a Sylvan Caryatid before passing the turn back. So it's pretty clear Chris wants to ramp and Ross just wants to try to beat down.
Yeah, that's true. The attack with the Elvish Mystic is kind of like a classic situation because what Chris is saying is basically, I'm willing to trade, or I want to trade this Elvish Mystic. So that's going to make Ross think, you know, do I want to beat down with my creature, do I want to trade? But there's a lot of kind of mind games going there because if Chris knows Ross is not going to block, why not attack, you know?
Get the free 1 in and just move along. He did have another mana accelerant again with the 0/3 Caryatid, so he might not even cared if the Mystic did die. Ross decided, all right, I'll leave my bird in play, I'll get in for 1 in the air, play a Skyjack, move along here. So we'll see if, you know, that actual exchange, how it's going to end up for both players, because it seems like Chris would have been perfectly fine with the trade, but then again, as you said, maybe not.
It looks to me like the crucial number of mana in Chris's deck is going to be 4. That's where a lot of his creatures come down. So given that he had 3 lands in his hand with the 0/3 wall, he's probably fine losing that Elvish Mystic if he has to.
He's also a pretty nice start right now. He had Mizian Mortars for the Skyjack, and now he has Domri come into play. Looks like that's probably going to tick up. I would be surprised if he wants to fight.
Yeah, this is really perfect for Chris. I mean, to have your mana you know, established really quickly and to have 1 removal spell and a threat, that's basically all you need. He's really in good shape here, especially being on the play.
Scavenging Ooze goes to the hand from Domri, so he even hits with the Planeswalker. Ross pretty far behind at this point. All he has is a 1/1 flyer. Mutavault activation would basically take up his turn. Let's see, that's another 1-drop. So he needs to get to the board pretty fast here.
Yeah, now we talked about the strength of white being the fast, efficient creatures, but one of the weaknesses is it doesn't have a lot of ways to remove cards from the board. Not quite the same potential to come back from behind that a deck with a lot of removal might have. So Ross is going to have to be careful if he wants to claw his way back into the game.
Attacks for 3, puts Domri down to 1, which means it can't fight this turn, plays a Dried Militant and just passes the turn back. But what I fear for Merriam, as you see Domri's going to check the top and miss, is that now the big creatures for green are going to start coming.
Yeah.
This is when, you know, Ember Swallower, Gore-Clan Rampager, potentially Stormbreath Dragon, those things start coming to the table, and then things get really hard for him.
The thing that really impresses me about this red-green deck is you have a number of giant beasts. And it's great if you can go, you know, 4-drop and then another 4-drop or a 5-drop and continue throwing them onto the table. However, with the new monstrosity mechanic, there's really no bad case scenario for this red-green deck. You play 1 creature, and if all you have is lands, then you're just going to make your guy an 8/9. You know, Ember Swallower being monstrous, or Polychronos destroying the opponent's board. Any of these things, there's really nothing bad that can happen to you in terms of the number of lands you draw, as long as you have a couple.
So now here's a Banisher Priest from Merriam. Scavenging Ooze is one of those cards, again, where it might not have monstrosity, but you certainly have a nice mana sink there.
Yeah, it's a, you know, kind of like a effective monstrosity. It's the old version of monstrosity.
Yeah. Some would argue it's probably too good, a little bit better than monstrosity. So Banisher Priest is going to take that down. Domri's going to go down to 1 from the Judge's Familiar, and now you're going to see a Temple, a little scry action here from Ross, showing off his red splash now. So Chris hadn't seen that before. We don't know if those guys sat near each other during the tournament either, but now Ross is giving away a little information that says, hey, I've got some red cards too, but you might not know which ones they are.
Yeah, for sure, and that's going to be something that Chris has to think about. Especially with the Planeswalkers in his deck, is he going to worry about burn? Is there a certain amount of loyalty that he can feel safe with his Planeswalkers? Those are going to be big questions. And then also just the combat math. White Weenie is very tricky, and with the extra element of the red, it's really tough to know when you should and shouldn't put your creatures in combat.
Lightning Strike takes care of the Banisher Priest. Ooze comes back, you get an activation, removing that priest, becomes a 3/3. Gain a little bit of life as well. Domri's going to check the top. Don't love the position for Ross yet. Thankfully for him, Domri's not hitting.
Yeah, Cedric, that Scavenging Ooze, though, I mean, against a deck with 26 creatures, I'm looking at Ross's deck, 26 creatures and not a lot of ways to remove a Scavenging Ooze. The longer the game goes, the bigger that thing's going to get, and the life gain makes it really hard to race.
Well, here's the thing. If Scavenging Ooze is going to stay around, that means that Posporelis is probably going to stay around too. So things are getting worse before they get better, because here's the World Eater, aptly named.
Certainly true. And really, this card was designed for this kind of matchup. You know, hold the ground really well, put on a clock, but most importantly, just decimate those 1 toughness creatures.
Sylvan Caryatid, going to activate for a green. Scavenging Ooze comes across, remove that Daring Skyjack. So now Ross is looking at a 4/4 coming his way. There's a Domri hanging out there. There's a Posporelis that's a 5/5, which is going to threaten Monstrosity at any point. Again, Monstrosity is the ability that you can activate at instant speed, so it's not something that Chris has to dedicate his turn to. He can just threaten it the entire time.
Yep, that's a good point.
Ross is going to take a look. I don't think he's going to like what he reads.
Yeah, certainly not. Now, Ross has, I noticed a Scry land that either he's been holding or he drew recently, but gives him at least a little bit of flexibility in terms of sculpting the game, but he's just facing, you know, almost insurmountable odds here. Let's see what he can come up with.
That's an instant Scry to the bottom there with the Temple.
Yeah.
He's going to need...
It's funny thing about Scry is it becomes a lot easier when you're losing. Is this card going to save me, or is this card not going to save me?
You see, Judge's Familiar keeps going after Domri, which, again, I don't think Chris happens to mind. There's a Precinct Captain, a card that is just really, really outclassed here. So now, if you're Chris, you see the board position that you're in, you're obviously very happy with where you're at. Now you have to think of, okay, how can I go about losing this game?
Yeah, exactly. Now he's at a really comfortable life total, but White Weenie certainly can come out of nowhere, especially with the red splash. You got to be thinking about Brave the Elements, making your entire team unblockable. You have to be thinking about Burn, Boros Charm especially. But yeah, if he can continue putting the pressure on Ross, you know, eventually force him into chump blocking, whilst not being frivolous with his life total, that's going to be the best way to play this game.
So we see Domri hits another Sylvan Caryatid. In come the monster. Scavenging Ooze is a 4/4.
Posporelis is a 5/5 for now.
Yeah, but threatening to get much, much bigger. He has access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana, so we could see an activation here for 2. So X,
X is 2, which would be enough to destroy 2 1 toughness creatures or a 2/2. Now, this is kind of an interesting play because he, of course, does have the option to do it before blockers, which would maybe allow his creatures to get through. But you really can't go wrong just leaving your mana open, especially given that his creatures are bigger to begin with and that he's in the favorable position in the game. It's really on Ross to make the first move, which is pretty important.
So we see him reaching for mana. It looks like he might be considering a Monstrosity activation here, but I agree with you. He has no real reason to flinch at this point, but it is going to be for, looks like it's going to be for 1. Targeting the Precinct Captain.
Okay. So that won't kill the Precinct Captain, but potentially could allow a further burn spell. This makes me think of something like Flames of the Firebrand, which I'm not sure is in his list.
That's the first thing I thought of as well. There's also Chandra Pyromaster hanging out.
That solves the mystery, Chandra Pyromaster, to do the extra 1 damage.
A card I think you're a touch familiar with.
Yeah.
This is in Modern, I guess, but it looks like it's going to be okay in Standard, and Ross is going to he's going to scoop up that Precinct Captain along with everything else.
Yeah, so that game really just went perfectly for Chris. He was on the play, he had his mana acceleration, he had big threats, and he had answers to what Ross was doing. So
now it's funny. We talked about the Elvish Mystic versus Judge Familiar on that opening turn. Chris, I think when we ended that game, I think he may have had 4 lands, but for a while there he was sitting around with 3.
Yeah.
You wonder if maybe that trade there at the beginning may have changed the landscape of how that game would have went?
Yeah, that's also a thing that can be really hard to predict right from turn 1. And from Ross's perspective, it's really not his game plan to deny his opponent's mana. His game plan is just to attack in the air. And with that Judge's Familiar, and with the opponent saying, I want to trade with your Judge's Familiar, it's really challenging for him to make the judgment call at that point so early in the game to lose his creature. But now that Chris has set the precedent for that, maybe he's going to be a little bit more bold in offering those trades.
We'll find out as we move on to the second game. So we're going to take a look at the sideboard here. You see Ross has already moved pretty quickly, went to the deck box. Now he's shuffling his cards in. It looks like he has a plan here. So we take a look at his sideboard. I know you've got the deck list in front of you. What can he do to kind of turn things around? Because I know he's got Reckoners in there, but what else does he have?
Yeah, of the two decks, I would say that the red-green is a little bit more expected, and Ross probably came in with a plan for this matchup. He has the Boros Reckoners, which are excellent cards against both red and green in particular, because they don't have any non-damage removal that can take them out. So a Boros Reckoner either just sitting on defense is going to make it hard for Chris, or attacking to deal the last few points of damage. Both really powerful. Ross has a Pacifism here, which is a great answer to many of the just giant red and green creatures that are going to either be holding the ground or attacking. However, important to note that it doesn't stop Monstrosity.
True.
Beyond that, he's got a couple Planeswalkers, Johnny Caller the Pride. While you might not think of it as particularly being like a hate card against red and green, it is really powerful in its ability to race in the air. So it's going to be interesting if Ross brings in the Johnnies, because they threaten to come off the top of the deck at any time and represent a huge amount of damage.
Sure.
Gideon, Champion of Justice, is a pretty unique and powerful card that I could really see being quite good in a creature mirror like this. It goes up fast, and it's going to be too big for anything to block.
I guess the question is, do you have enough time to be able to board in a 4-drop like that against this deck that does have mana acceleration? Because it doesn't feel like, to me, that Ross wants to go like towards a long game. I think he just wants to try to get over with, maybe steal a win with those Ajani's that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's certainly the big question, is will he have time to set up all these more complicated board states? And to be honest, I'm going to defer to Ross on this. Like I said, he probably came in with a plan for this matchup. He certainly put Gideon on his sideboard for a reason. I'm not sure if this is the matchup for it, but we'll see. You could also see him doing things like changing his sideboarding, whether he's on the play or the draw.
Sure.
You know, being a little bit more defensive on the draw and a little bit more ambitious on the play.
On the other side of things here, we'll take a look at Chris's sideboard very quickly before we do begin game 2. 1 Bow of Nylea. He's got 3 copies of Anger of the Gods. I think those are probably going to join us here.
Yeah, that's going to be huge. Really powerful defensive card.
2 Mistcutter Hydra, not particularly for this matchup. Same thing can be said for Rukthar the Unbowed. There's a Faded into Antiquity, which actually does have some targets here in Spear of Heliod, but again, it's a little bit narrow. Same with Destructive Revelry. And there's 2 Burning Earth and 3 Peak Eruption. So of these 15 cards, I think that 3 Anger of the Gods are pretty much going to be it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if he decides to take any of his anti-air cards in, so to speak, the Bow of Nylea and the Rurik Thars having a reach. Like, interaction I'd be curious to see is Bow of Nylea facing down Daring Skyjack.
Okay.
Daring Skyjack gains flying with Battalion, and that's not optional. And if Ross mistakenly or intentionally attacks with 3 creatures against Bow of Nylea, the Daring Skyjack is going to be at risk of dying.
Well, Ross looks happy with his 7, while Chris is taking a look at his. And he says, all right, I'm going to keep 2. So Ross is going to take 2 from Sacred Foundry, start off with a Dried Millicent, and things are going to be underway here for game number 2. I think this is an ideal start for him. He needs to get going pretty fast here, I think.
Yeah, he's got his most effective 1-drop creature with the 2 power, and he's got both his colors. Great so far.
And you see Chris starts off with a mountain and not a green land. So it doesn't really seem like he might have a Mana Accelerate. Ross comes across for 2. He's got a Temple. We'll see if he has another 1-drop.
Yeah, now, in Old Standard with the M13 lands that come into play untapped if you have a basic, we're sometimes used to seeing the turn 1 Mountain start because he could have Rootbound Crag, but of course that card is rotated out, so the turn 1 Mountain play could be a hint that maybe his hand is land light. We'll see.
There's a Caryatid, so there's no 3, so Ross is free to keep attacking here. And see, I think he did keep the top card from the Scry. He's got 3 mana,
wow,
he's got a Spear.
That's a huge card right here. It makes his creatures big enough that they can no longer be safely blocked by the Caryatid.
So this is basically the new Glorious Anthem in Spear of Heliod, but it's a little bit different because Glorious Anthems, you could play multiples and continuously pump your guys. This is Legendary, so you can only play 1 at a time.
Yeah, that's an effective downfall of the card. However, let's see if the upside of the card comes into play in this matchup. If there's any time that destroying a creature that dealt damage to you is going to be effective, it's going to be when you're being attacked by giant, trampling monstrosity guys.
So Chris just plays a Scavenging Ooze past the turn back. That's why you may have seen some hesitation from him. Now there's a Banisher Priest ready to take down this Scavenging Ooze.
Banisher Priest is just so effective in this kind of game. When you're on the front foot, you're forcing the action. You play Banisher Priest, you progress your board at the same time as setting the opponent back. It's really really perfect, and I think Chris is going to need a big play here if he's going to come back.
Not only that, you know, if Chris were to have Shock in his deck list, which is a card that's picked up in some popularity, Banisher Priest being a 3/3 is going to kind of cancel that out as well.
Ross has a number of ways to protect the Banisher Priest, the Spear just being one of them. He also has Brave the Elements and Boros Charm to protect it.
So Midgame Mortar's in the house. Going to take care of the Banisher Priest, 4 damage. That happens to be more than 3 toughness. So the Ooze is going to go back to Chris's side, and he has mana to activate it too to make it a 3/3.
Yeah, that's important here. It's going to be you know, basically the first step on his way back. So, I think Chris would have really loved Anger of the Gods there, but Midgame Mortars is a good start.
So Chris is going to pass the turn back. He's got a Scavenging Ooze. He's got mana available for activations. Ross is going to play a Plains, activate that Mutavault, which is a 3/3 because of the Spear, and get into the red zone. Decisions. I think we're going to see at least 1 block. The question is, are we going to see 2?
Now, the only thing that Mutavault is not it's not a white creature, so it cannot be protected by Brave the Elements, which could be a reason why Chris made this wise block to put his guy in front of a Mutavault rather than a white creature.
So Ross deals some damage. He's going to show him a lethal Boros Charm, and we're going to
4 damage.
Yeah, we're going to move on to game number 3.
All right,
here.
so we've seen 2 pretty one-sided games. The player on the play coming out fast and just really running over the opponent.
That's the draw that Ross needs in this matchup too, especially when he's on the play. Of course, I mean, he wants to start off with a 2-power creature, either the Dryad or the Soldier of the Pantheon. He does not really want to start off with Judge's Familiar. It's definitely the worst of the 3.
Yeah, while it is important that it has flying and can get through a little bit faster, it just doesn't really pack the punch that the other two do.
A quick update on another match that did take place. Your friend, I use the term friend loosely, maybe not, I don't know. Owen Turtenwald.
My associate. Yeah.
The man that you tolerate, Owen Turtenwald. He did win the match 2-0 pretty quickly. So Mono Red is now sitting at 8-1. And with any luck, he'll be able to draw next round.
Yeah, that's great. Anytime I'd see Owen walking around this early in the match, I knew something good had happened.
Yeah. And I think he played against a Sphinx's Revelation deck in the last round, so he was able to dispatch that pretty quickly. Looks like he had some aggressive draws, and maybe the opponent didn't run into a Supreme Verdict on time.
Well, that's great. I'd be happy to see Mono Red in the top 8 here.
Yeah, some beatdowns. Definitely some beatdowns. Now, you see both players here. Ross is going back to the sideboard. You mentioned that he might change things depending on if he's on the play or the draw, while Chris is just shuffling and looks pretty content with his configuration after sideboard.
Yeah, Ross may have changed things. Certainly, his cards can change in value being on the play or the draw. However, Ross is also a savvy player. He might just be. I think he would act as though he was changing his sideboard, whether he decides to or not.
The always question when I'm doing coverage here in the booth, I watch a lot of matches, of course, is some players just go right back to shuffling right away. Others take the time to look at the sideboard, weigh the decision to consider some things. But there's varying degrees of how effective that can be. There can be the one side where Chris is just like, I'm confident, like I lost that game, whatever, but I love my setup. But Ross is like, well, maybe I'll change some things, maybe I won't. So I like how the players sometimes jockey for position in this situation.
Certainly, yeah. I think one of the key interactions in this matchup is going to be the Anger of the Gods, in addition to the other red removal spells against both Brave the Elements and Boros Charm. Because, of course, while Brave the Elements doesn't stop a Supreme Verdict, Anger of the Gods deals damage from a red source, which would be reduced to 0 if the creatures have protection from red. So 1 mana to save your team from what's otherwise the best card in the matchup is pretty huge.
And also the fact that, Brave enacts that Falter effect. You take a look at the creatures in Chris's deck list. I mean, for the most part, he's green creatures. He's got Ember Swallower and Stormbreath Dragon, but everything else you see here is basically green. So a Falter effect with Brave the Elements is going to be pretty good in this matchup too, if we get to that situation.
Yeah. The beauty of the card is in its flexibility. You protect your creatures, or you make it the lethal attack. And the same is true of Boros Charm. It's probably in there largely to protect his creatures from Supreme Verdict, but we saw last game just go into the head for 4 also is going to come up a lot.
And Ross has made like a pretty strong declaration with his deck list, because we have the privilege of actually being able to see it, that his only red card in his deck is Boros Charm. So he feels that card is very strong in the format right now.
Yeah.
I
have to agree with him, yeah.
So here we go. Chris is going to be on the play this game. He wants to get off to maybe an Elvish Mystic.
And that's big, Cedric.
Yeah, that start.
The Brave the Elements and the Boros Charm. Ross is going to have a lot more flexibility, a lot more luxury, so to speak, to leave up mana to protect his creatures when he's on the play, when he's the one coming out fast. But when he's behind, it's not going to be so easy to always have that 1 or 2 extra mana available.
So both players going to lay out their 7. This is basically a match for top 8. We believe the winner of this match is going to be able to draw. So we will see what's going to happen here. Chris going to take a look. Again, looking for maybe a little mana acceleration into a Gorkland Rampager or a Pulachronos World Eater. We will see. Chandra wouldn't be bad either.
Both players look pretty stoic, taking their time. But yeah, it looks like Chris, decided it wasn't going to be good enough to beat Ross.
Now, all right, I'm gonna dive into the brain of Reduke here.
All right, sure.
You're playing for top 8. You're playing an aggressive deck. You're on the draw game 3. Your opponent takes a mulligan. Is there a mental fist pump there? A little happiness?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much the mulligan that's good as the keep that's bad. When your opponent quickly keeps 7, it's like they're saying they're ready. Yep. They're ready for what you have. It's, a quick keep of 7 cards is going to make me think of Anger of the Gods or Supreme Verdict. But when they go to 6, they look at their 6 cards. Maybe it's not perfect, but if they have lands and spells, they're really not going to want to go to 5. So, Ross is not counting his chickens here, but it's at least he feels like he's in the game.
Yeah, it feels like probably a step in the right direction.
Certainly a step in the right direction.
With how game 1 went, you're hoping you don't see a repeat performance of that, because I'm not sure Ross can really ever beat that draw from Chris's deck, and having 1 less card means maybe it's not as likely to happen.
Yeah, and the Gruul deck is a deck that needs a lot of mana, it needs threats, and it's also packing spot removal. So that's a lot of needs to fulfill with a 6-card hand. The lower Chris goes, the lower the chances are that he's going to have everything that he needs. But also at a certain point, it's just impossible for him to have everything he needs.
Sure.
If you go low enough on cards, you can't have the mana and the threats and the spot removal all at the same time. It's just not possible.
Well, Ross kept his 7 pretty quickly. And I think, there's a range of hands that his deck can keep, but of course he's going to want to start off with a 1-drop and then maybe a 2-drop and then just curve out that way, and maybe one of those Boros Charm Brave Element type effects. So he's pretty pleased thus far. Chris going to take a look at his 6.
All right, they're ready.
Happy enough, no Elvish Mystic. That's probably a sigh of relief for Ross. He's going to start off with a Temple.
Yeah.
So he's a little slow to the board.
Doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't have a 1-drop. He could just have a strange mana draw and want to play 2 creatures next turn. But I mean, he was satisfied with his hand without the turn 1 play, so he's got to have something.
He's going to go down to 18 with a Sacred Foundry. You see Chris did play a Sylvan Caryatid. Ross has a Daring Skyjack. Going to pass the turn back. And boy, if Chris has land plus Chandra, this could get ugly.
Now, I wonder to what extent Ross chose his creatures with Sylvan Caryatid in mind. He has the Daring Skyjack, which is 3-power creature that's pretty important against a creature that you can't remove and have a hard time attacking through.
And speaking with Ross in between rounds, he said he's been absolutely thrilled with the Skyjack. The fact that it gets flying has been a really big deal. He's been doing a lot of chump attacking with Mutavaults and other kind of useless creatures like Drive Militant just to get that 3 in the air.
Yeah, at a certain point, you do what you got to do, but the last few points of damage are worth everything.
And you see Caryatid cannot block here, so Chris going to go down to 17. Ross has got a Precinct Captain and a Mutavault before he passes the turn back, but that Mutavault is not a white land.
Right. Now, I actually can't tell here. Is this just 2 different pictures of Sylvan Caryatid?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And that is a Stormbreath Dragon.
Protection from white. That's a big card.
It's going to come across. It's not going to hang back on defense. So Chris is going to come across here for 4, and you take a look at Chris's mana. 2 Caryatid's 4 lands. We're 1 land away from Monstrosity.
Yeah. Now, Ross can't banish your Priestess. He can't destroy it with Spear of Heliod. Can't block it with Judge's Familiar. What he can do is attack through it with Brave the Elements if Chris is ever in a position to be on the defense with the dragon. But that's going to be the first step for Ross, is he needs to make sure he puts Chris back on the defensive, or else that dragon is just going to take the game.
And this is pretty scary right now too. You see he's going to cast Spear. Ross
Spear's a good start.
He's coming across for 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yep.
But he's got a lot of cards in his hand right now.
Chris is deciding whether to chump block, I guess, with the Caryatid. He could either prevent 4 damage, or he could stop Precinct Captain from making a 1/1 or actually 2/2 creature with Spear of Heliod.
Oh, it looks like he's going to go blocking. Okay. So there's your block on the Skyjack. Ross says first strike damage. Yep. I'd like a token if you don't mind.
It looks like Chris values his life total more than the board presence of the 2/2 token.
If you're Ross right now, if there's no attack in the Stormbreath Dragon, you're probably pretty happy, right?
Oh, you're thrilled.
Okay.
That's really step 1.
Step 1's not achieved.
No.
In for 4 we go. Merriam's going to go down to 10.
Now, the fact that Chris allowed that 2/2 token to come into play, it might be a hint that he's going to have a creature that can effectively block it, or that, you know, Anger of the Gods to remove everything other than that 4/4 dragon.
So Anger of the Gods is going to resolve. It's going to clear everything up except for that dragon, as you did mention. And now Ross has to rebuild everything, and Chris is happy to just say go.
And he has to rebuild fast.
Yeah. So Ross is going to draw a card. I think it's another Boros Reckoner. I'm not sure if it's a land or not. You see a Brave the Elements in his hand, but does he have creatures to rebuild with?
I mean, at this point, Ross is just thinking, what needs to happen for me to win this game? He has this turn, next turn, and maybe if he's lucky, one extra turn after that. But he's really got to put something together starting now.
And it's tough for him too, because I mean, right now he's staring at 2 Reckoners that he can't cast. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that he's staring at a Banisher Priest that could target nothing and still can't target anything.
Yep.
And he's just got to play one.
That's what he goes for. You know, just got to get something on the table here.
So Chris is going to untap. He's going to draw a card. Stormbreath Dragon back into the red zone. Going to knock Merriam down to 6. And there's a double Lightning Strike, and that's a concession.
So that's it.
Chris Posporelis is going to defeat Ross Merriam 2-1. Gruul defeating Boros. And with any luck, Chris is going to be playing top 8.
In good position.